No, I will not go on the racetrack with those brake pads. Absolutely not. I'm too old to be hitting this wall head on. Absolutely not. They said, well, we would make up a penalty.
There is one component on a NASCAR Cup Series car that a team cannot change overnight under any circumstances. Not with permission. Not by starting at the rear. Not by accepting a penalty. It is the brake pads. Denny Hamlin discovered exactly what that means at Iowa Speedway when he believed he had a bad batch and found there was no legal way out. As Hamlin put it, if the wrong decision is made or the pads are defective, there is no way out of the box. What happened inside the NASCAR hauler on that Sunday morning has almost nothing to do with the rulebook, because there was no rule for the thing Hamlin was asking about. That is the entire point of this story. Hamlin waited until after the race to describe the conversation publicly, and he did it on his own Actions Detrimental podcast in a completely level tone. The sentence he repeated from that meeting has been argued over ever since. Before any of that, though, the problem was already visible on Saturday. Within moments of hitting the track at Iowa Speedway, Hamlin knew something was wrong with the car. And crew chief Chris Gayle identified the same issue from the timing stand. They did not have adequate or consistent brake pressure. The number 11 Toyota suffered a brake failure roughly 2 laps into the practice session. Hamlin later explained that the pressure was erratic rather than simply absent. There were moments when the pedal felt normal, particularly after a caution period when the components had cooled, and there were green flag runs where he had what amounted to roughly 10% brake pressure. Hamlin was not the only driver dealing with it. His Joe Gibbs Racing teammate Chase Briscoe began suffering from similar problems, and crew chief James Small reached the same conclusion about the number 19 car. The same thing happened at Alliance Partner 2311 Racing, where Riley Herbst and crew chief Davin Restivo were fighting the identical issue in the number 35. Those 3 cars, along with the number 23 of Bubba Wallace, spent well into the morning garage hours making adjustments in the hope of giving their drivers something usable. There is a detail here that separates this from a single team making a single mistake. The other Tier 1 Toyota organization, Legacy Motor Club, had no brake problems at all that weekend. Number 43 car chief Austin Pollock explained why, before the race, in one sentence, JGR and 2311 run a different package than we do. In other words, this was a package problem shared by Joe Gibbs Racing and 2311 Racing, not a problem with one driver or one set of hands. Hamlin went out and qualified with those pads anyway, because he had no other option, and he put the car deep in the field in 32nd position according to reporting from the garage. Then it got worse before the green flag even flew. Chris Gayle's team changed the brake cooling ducts on the number 11 on Sunday morning, and that change carried it to the rear penalty. Given where Hamlin had already qualified, the penalty was close to meaningless. Now comes the part that most people missed, and it is the part that kills the idea that Hamlin was running some kind of secret experiment ahead of the championship rounds. Hamlin has never found the feel he wants at Iowa Speedway, so he borrowed heavily from 2311 Racing, whose cars had been strong there. We tried to run something a little bit different, not unknown, Hamlin said. Other teams have run it quite a bit before. I wanted to lean a little bit on 2311. They had been pretty strong at this track over the last year or so. He explained the reasoning further. I kind of wanted to lean on their setups a little bit more this time around since I hadn't had success at this racetrack quite yet. He said he had not found what that good feel is at the track yet, so he needed to install a setup that had run well and then learn from that baseline. This was not a package pulled out of thin air. This has been run, I would say, in combination, 20 races and maybe more amongst all the cars, and that's just the cars I know about, Hamlin said. He also took ownership of the decision, telling his team that he could not figure the place out on his own and that they should install someone else's setup that had already been good. Part of adopting that package raised an obvious question inside the shop. His crew asked him directly whether he wanted the matching brakes as well, pointing out that if he wanted to be exactly like those cars, the brakes were quite a bit different. Hamlin waved it off. His view was that it had been fine for them, so it would be fine for him. That is the decision the entire weekend turned on. And the failure was not in the rotors. It was not in the calipers. Hamlin and his team came to the conclusion that they had received a bad batch of actual brake pads simply because everything else was the same for all the other cars. And yeah, just realized pretty quickly that it was not going to work for me, Hamlin said. To understand why he could not simply fix it, you have to understand how the rule is structured. Because it is more specific than most people assume. There are things teams are permitted to do overnight without penalty. They are allowed to drain their brake lines, a process referred to as bleeding, and both the number 11 and number 35 teams did exactly that. They are permitted to replace rotors if those rotors are cracked, and that is treated as a safety matter. They are also permitted to change calipers, although doing so sends the car to the rear of the field for the start. There are also hard limits. Teams are not allowed to change from a heavier short track and road course rotor to a lighter superspeedway rotor, or the reverse once that decision has been made ahead of technical inspection. And brake pads cannot be changed before the race at all. The only available path is a lengthy stop behind the wall after the green flag has already flown, which effectively removes a car from competition. Hamlin laid out the logic behind the distinction, and he was fair about it. The calipers, the brake lines, and the master cylinders are mandated parts supplied by NASCAR because the sanctioning body single sources those components. A defect in them is treated as NASCAR's responsibility, and teams are permitted to replace them. Brake pads are different. Teams select their own pads, so a bad pad is treated as the team's own mistake. Hamlin openly conceded the reasoning behind the restriction rather than pretending it was arbitrary. We do not want 36 teams having a qualifying brake pad and a race brake pad, he said, describing NASCAR's position. That is a real and reasonable concern. If pads could be swapped freely overnight, teams would run one compound to set a fast qualifying lap and a completely different compound for race distance. The counter-argument came from inside the garage as well. Chris Gayle and number 19 crew chief James Small both suggested that NASCAR needed to review the brake pad replacement policy specifically in the name of safety. Small was not able to change his pads either, despite stating that morning that they were destroyed and that he did not feel confident about his team's chances. That is the box Hamlin described. And on Sunday morning, he went to the hauler to try to find a door. His first request was not for leniency. He asked to change the pads and take one of the harshest starting positions available in exchange. I told them I'd start on pit lane, Hamlin said, adding that they had a major problem. The response he received was procedural. That's not the way it's written right now. Hamlin pushed back on the framing rather than the answer. He acknowledged that the rule read the way it read, but argued that the situation called for judgment. This is to hopefully keep my car from blowing a rotor or going into a corner dead straight and wiping someone or myself head on into the wall. His broader wish about the rule was straightforward. So that's where I wish there was an asterisk at the bottom of the rule saying, but we will use common sense. When that did not work, he raised the stakes on himself. He offered to start on pit lane at Iowa Speedway and then start dead last the following week as well. 2 races of punishment for 1 set of brake pads. His argument was that a penalty that severe would deter any team from abusing the exception because nobody would willingly accept it for a competitive gain. That offer was turned down too. So Hamlin asked the final question, the one that changed the tone of the meeting. I did my best in that hauler. I just laid out my case and I said, what if I just tell the team, nope, I will not go out on the racetrack with those brake pads. Absolutely not. I'm too old to be hitting this wall head on. Absolutely not, Hamlin said. According to Hamlin, the answer was not a citation from the rulebook. They said, well, we would make up a penalty and it would be worse than what it would be if you just came in and changed them under green. His reaction was almost casual. He said he supposed he would just have to go slower, and that if he lost the brakes entirely, he would putt around the racetrack and finish however many laps down he ended up. Then came the line that spread across the sport. So they did acknowledge that they were willing to make up a rule. Hamlin got in the car and started at the rear with the same pads that had failed in practice. Facing 350 laps on a 7/8 mile track where braking is the dominant variable, his brake pedal went straight to the floor by lap 3. This was the worst mindset I've ever had going into a race, Hamlin said. "I never felt beat before a race started, and I thought I was done today." He knew there was a chance the car could be improved. But he also knew the same components remained underneath it. He reset his expectations completely, saying he switched his goals to needing some cars to wreck so he might salvage a finish around 25th. Chase Briscoe went through the same experience on a delay. He said he had never carried that much anxiety into a race. His first stage was clean, which surprised him, and then midway through the second stage, the pedal went to the floor exactly as it had the previous day. "I would have a restart and it would be good for 5 or 6 laps, then right back to the floor," Briscoe said. He described pumping the pedal nonstop all the way around the racetrack, never knowing whether he would have anything when he arrived at the corner. Neither result matched the circumstances. Denny Hamlin finished 5th. Chase Briscoe finished 6th. Ty Gibbs won the Iowa Corn 3/5. Hamlin credited the crew for the recovery. "They just did a great job of giving me something that I could somewhat get around the corners for 350 laps. He said that if he had known in advance the entire race would feel that way, he would have accepted a top 25 and been honestly happy with it, but the team kept working on the car and made adjustments around the absence of brakes, which allowed him to manipulate the car differently." He looked physically drained afterward, and he delivered a joke with an edge to it, saying he would retire at the end of the year if he had to do that every week. He also offered a summary of the weekend. "Lesson learned on our part that obviously we got in a box that we weren't allowed to get out of." For context, the 45-year-old driver's contract runs through 2027, and he has already indicated it is likely his last. Then there is the outcome nobody scripted. That weekend actually strengthened his championship position. Hamlin arrived at Iowa Speedway leading the standings by 84 points. He left leading by 103. Tyler Reddick, who had been second, finished last after an incident on lap 4 involving Eric Jones, and that result dropped him from second to 4th. The order behind Hamlin reshuffled to Ty Gibbs in second, Ryan Blaney in third, and Reddick in 4th. 7 drivers were mathematically eliminated from the regular season title fight. A group that included Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, Chase Briscoe, Carson Hocevar, and Chris Buescher. 3 races remain before the championship rounds begin. Richmond on Saturday night. Then New Hampshire and Daytona. Finishing the regular season as points leader carries a seeding advantage, reported as a 25-point edge over second place entering the 10-race championship stretch. Hamlin spent part of the following week bass fishing in Texas with professional angler Chris Salda. What did not happen is the part the garage is watching. The rule reads exactly the same today as it did before Iowa Speedway. Nothing was rewritten on Sunday night. The next team that receives a bad batch of pads will be standing in the identical box, making the identical arguments with the identical set of options. There is one additional thread worth mentioning, clearly labeled as fan speculation rather than reporting. Some users on the NASCAR forum connected this brake package to Christopher Bell's repeated brake failures at Phoenix during recent playoff races, reasoning that Phoenix and Iowa Speedway are similar in size and place similar demands on the components. No team or official has confirmed any link. The topic also reached broadcast coverage, where analysts Steve Latarde and Todd Gordon debated the brake pad restriction and its impact on the Joe Gibbs racing entries, which shows the discussion extended well beyond one podcast. That leaves the question the weekend produced. On one side, a discretionary exception is an exploitable exception, and building common sense into a rule is precisely how enforcement becomes inconsistent from one weekend to the next. On the other side, a rule with no escape hatch put a driver on a short track for 350 laps with a pedal that hit the floor on lap 3. And that risk was never his alone to carry. Hamlin was not asking for a free pass. By his own description, he was asking for a door. So which side do you land on? Was NASCAR protecting the integrity of the rulebook or acknowledging that the rulebook bends when officials decide it should? Leave your answer in the comments and subscribe for continued coverage as the regular season closes out at Richmond.